Hello there and welcome to a rainy day in the garden. Today we are talking about worms. I came out here to actually feed my worm bin, and I thought I would chat with you about what kind of worms I use in this 5-gallon container worm bin. A lot of times people will say that there's the red wiggler worms and different worms you can order, but what about garden worms? So I thought I would just share with you the story of my worm farm and the kinds of worms that I am using in here so far this year and how it's going basically. To start off, I love this worm farm. I am not a big earthworm person. I am not one of those gardeners that just wants to grab earthworms up with my hands. Honestly, I found them kind of a little gross, but the worm farm has actually given me a whole new appreciation for them, and I've been really enjoying the whole process of it. So I'm going to talk you through kind of the whole story of it. But basically, this year I am using worms out of my garden in the worm farm, and I'll share with you how that's going. So first off, this is just one of the 5-gallon worm farm ways of doing this, 5-gallon buckets. I will put a link in the description to the blog that I followed for the directions. Basically, you just get 3 5-gallon containers and you drill holes in them, and that creates the worm farm. And so the bottom is completely sealed, and then you have different layers which have, actually I should probably put this one on top. So you've got, I'm going to show you. So we've got the bottom down there that is completely full, and that collects all the liquid. Then I've got both the other bins are like this, and they have holes drilled in the bottom so that the worms can move up. And so you have all of your worms and your soil and everything in one bin. And then basically once this gets all eaten, I will fill this one up with food. I will place it on top. The worms will crawl up through those holes, and then I will just take out all the compost from the bottom one, put it back on top, put more food in it, and you just keep rotating these bins, and it's pretty awesome. So in here I've got a bunch of, I actually used some of my old potty mix. In this really small urban garden space, I always felt bad with the old potty mix. When you pull a plant out of a container, and I have quite a few containers, the root ball has basically taken up all of the soil. It's used up a lot of the nutrients from that soil. I always felt bad just throwing soil out, but in an urban garden space like this, I don't really have room for a big compost heap. I do have a lot of containers, so I have a lot of soil. So I was trying to think what I could do to reuse that soil, and what I have found is the worm bin is perfect. So I actually will store that soil over here, and then as I need more kind of bedding for the worms, I will just use my old container soil, and that works really well. And then as I'm using the compost back in the garden, the soil is going back and being used in the actual garden, which if you have raised beds, they just seem to continually sink. So I'm kind of always needing compost, and I do get a decent gallon or so of compost every week or two. I have the food in there and all of that bedding, which is just the dirt, and then I've been putting in, so you'll see leaves whenever I trim in the garden, I put those in, and then I also do a lot of banana peels and coffee. Banana and coffee are 2 big things that we eat and drink a lot of in our house, so I kind of always have those coffee grounds and the bananas, and I feed those to the worms all the time. I'm just sort of always cycling that in, and the worms seem to really like it. There are some things you don't want to give worms. Garlic, onions, that type of thing are not good worm food, but they love banana peels, I have found, and the coffee grounds are nice because they also give them some grit, and coffee is good for your garden, so I figure it's a win, it's a win-win there. And so basically what worms to use, last year got a package of red wiggler worms. I think I got 250. I was shocked at how quickly they could crank through the food. I mean, I got so much compost. They just ate and ate and ate, and I was harvesting basically compost I think it was every 2 weeks, because I tend to fill these up I was filling them up pretty full, probably at least over halfway full with food and bedding, and they were going through that food in about 2 weeks. This year, the system is a little bit different. So I didn't have a good wintering over situation for the worms, and I ended up losing them over the winter, which was pretty disappointing. And then this spring I was going to order more worms, and then I figured, you know what, I'm just going to try to dig up some worms in the garden. I don't really know how many I ended up pulling out. Definitely not 250. I maybe have like 50 worms in there. I don't know. Definitely not the same amount, but they've actually been doing really well. So red wiggler worms are really good at digesting. That's why people use them. They really digest things quickly, and are great for a worm farm. But you know what? I just put in these leaves the other day. There you can see one of my native earthworms. They've been doing a really good job. So I am gonna start taking more careful like measurements of how often I'm filling this. But over, within a week or two, this will probably be all completely eaten up. Maybe I'll check back in with you on this video in a week or so, and we can talk about how it's doing. This is as full as I'm gonna fill up the container. I will start working on the next container now. And I do figure that with my compost, it's not pure worm castings that I'm putting on the garden. If a few of the leaves have decomposed and remain, or a few of the banana peels, have just kind of decomposed but are just hanging out, I don't worry about that. That doesn't bother me. I just want it broken up down enough that it can go in the garden. I can spread it out. And if there's a few tiny little twigs and stuff, it's not a big deal. But that it's broken enough that there's no like actively decomposing food. And I found that happens. So I just cleaned the bin out last night. I added some clippings from trimmings in the garden. Now I've added the bananas and the coffee grounds. And I harvested some of the compost, and let me show you what the compost looks like. Up this grow bag with the compost, and as you can see, there's a few little twigs and different bits of material from the clippings from the garden, but it's pretty well broken down, and there's certainly lots of worm castings in there, and it's a really nice fresh compost to help nurture the garden. And I feel so much better with all the sweeping up that I do and the containers that I'm emptying out and all the different things like that. I feel so much better just knowing that I'm not just tossing that literally like into the garbage, because we don't even have a green pickup here, so we really don't have good options for composting. But this, they can get through a lot, and just my little clippings and trimmings as a deadheading as I go around the garden, that's enough to fill up the worm bin. So I think right now my verdict with this is that you can use garden worms in your worm bin. You do not have to go out and buy special worms. Now, will you have a more efficient, faster, worm bin if you use special worms? Probably. Yeah, I could probably compost a lot more compost through that. But if you're not, wanting to be so completely serious about worm farming, because I will say it is a chore. You do have to come in and sift through it and get the worms out and move them over. I mean, there's a little bit of doing to be done. I think I did a video or two about it last year. I'll link, if you're interested in the worm bin situation, I'll link the other videos I've made about worms. But it is a little bit of doing, so I don't mind that they're a little slower, honestly. And in this size garden, this is a 20 by 20 garden. I don't need that much compost. I actually am I'm getting almost more compost than I really have space for. So it's perfect for me. And I just thought I would put that out there. If you're, on the edge, but you don't want to buy worms or whatever, you can do it with your garden worms. Watch them go. All right, I'm gonna check back in with you probably, let's see, in a couple weeks. I'll do a part 2 video, and we can see how the worms have digested all of that food. I'm gonna start the next bin, and I just do that too. Like as I'm going along, I collect the little pieces of things that need to be that I want to compost, the little trimmings. As I deadhead the petunias, I'll throw them in that new bin and start to collect more food for the next round. What do you think? Yeah. And so that's basically how it works. I really have left it, if you are on the edge or on the fence about whether or not you want to do worm composting, or I would recommend that you give it a go, even if you think it's kind of gross and you're not really into worms. I just put on my garden gloves when I'm dealing with them, and I find that it's not as bad as I would have thought before, because I truly am not a big worm person, but I love my worms. So anyways, I will check back in a couple weeks in part 2, and we can look at how it is composting, and I'll show you how I kind of sift through the worms, because again, this is a very like raw kind of setup that we have here, and she's talking to you too. And I don't have, you know, just tons of equipment. I just use my garden gloves, and I'll show you that whole process in part 2. But anyways, thank you for watching and hanging out in the garden on this kind of rainy day, but it's still kind of a nice day in the garden, and I will talk to you again soon. Bye bye.